Hello, everyone. The world is buzzing with numerous significant events, and today we delve into a particularly impactful one concerning economic policy and its far-reaching consequences. We'll explore how certain trade decisions have rippled through industries and affected everyday Americans. Stick around, as we'll be drawing conclusions at the end of our analysis. Trump envisioned that a 25% tariff would act as a shield, rescuing the United States economy. He believed this protectionist measure would invigorate domestic industries and safeguard American jobs. However, the reality unfolded quite differently, resembling less of a protective barrier and more of a detonation with widespread collateral damage. The intended economic salvation morphed into something akin to a nuclear bomb's impact, disrupting supply chains, inflating prices, and compelling iconic American companies to reconsider their operational strategies. Instead of fostering growth at home, the policy inadvertently pushed major players to seek refuge elsewhere, highlighting the intricate and often unpredictable nature of global economics when subjected to abrupt, large-scale interventions. The repercussions were felt almost immediately, not just within corporate boardrooms, but on factory floors and in the households of ordinary citizens. The fallout from this policy became starkly evident as major corporations, pillars of American industry, began relocating their production facilities. John Deere and Ford, names synonymous with American manufacturing prowess, found themselves compelled to move significant portions of their operations overseas. This strategic retreat was not undertaken lightly, but was a direct response to the escalating costs and logistical nightmares triggered by the tariffs. While these titans of industry navigated the complexities of international relocation, the average American consumer faced a different kind of storm. Prices for automobiles, essential household goods, and vital equipment began an upward spiral, skyrocketing to levels that strained family budgets. The intended economic boost had backfired, creating a scenario where businesses sought cost efficiencies abroad, while citizens bore the brunt of inflated prices at home, a painful paradox born from a policy meant to protect them. Consider the well-known slogan, "Nothing runs like a deer." It's a phrase that evokes images of reliability, power, and American agricultural strength. Yet, in the wake of the tariff policies, a different kind of running began. John Deere, facing increased production costs and supply chain disruptions, started running its operations, quite literally, all the way to Mexico. News outlets reported this significant shift. John Deere is moving some production from Iowa to Mexico. This wasn't merely a minor adjustment. It represented a fundamental change in the manufacturing footprint of one of America's most storied companies. John Deere announced a major change to where they manufacture their farming equipment. The decision to relocate part of its production, specifically from its Dubuque Works facility in Iowa, was a calculated move set to be completed by the end of 2026. This migration south of the border was driven by the need to mitigate the financial pressures imposed by the tariffs and maintain global competitiveness. However, this corporate survival strategy came at a steep price for the American workforce, leading to hundreds of U.S. layoffs, shaking the foundations of communities reliant on these manufacturing jobs and sending ripples of economic uncertainty across the agricultural heartland. The slogan took on a somber new meaning as the iconic green tractors began rolling off assembly lines far from their traditional American home. Please consider subscribing to our channel and hitting the like button. Your support is crucial for our growth and allows us to continue bringing you in-depth analysis on important economic and political events. Also, let us know in the comments where you're tuning in from. We love hearing from our global audience. John Deere, an entity deeply embedded in the fabric of American agriculture and recognized as one of its most iconic names, made the significant decision to transfer a segment of its production from the heartland state of Iowa to Mexico. This relocation was not merely a logistical adjustment, but a seismic event that sent shockwaves through the agricultural industry. The move, driven by economic pressures exacerbated by tariff policies, carried profound implications. Beyond the immediate impact on the company's operations and workforce, it triggered a cascade of significant consequences for the broader United States economy. The departure of such a prominent domestic manufacturer raised questions about the competitiveness of American industry, the future of manufacturing jobs, and the real-world effects of protectionist trade measures. The intricate web of suppliers, local businesses, and communities tied to John Deere's Iowa operations faced an uncertain future, illustrating how the decisions of a single major corporation could reverberate throughout the nation's economic landscape. In response to John Deere's announced move, the Trump administration reacted with forceful rhetoric and the threat of severe economic penalties. Trump responded with threats of imposing a staggering 200% tariff on imports from companies, specifically naming giants like John Deere and Ford, if they proceeded with relocating production outside the United States. This aggressive stance was clearly aimed at pressuring these corporations to reverse their decisions and bring manufacturing operations back onto American soil. The underlying goal was to use punitive tariffs as leverage, forcing companies to prioritize domestic production over potentially more cost-effective overseas alternatives. These threats, while sounding potent and decisive initially, represented a high-stakes gamble in the complex arena of international trade and corporate strategy. The administration was betting that the fear of massive tariffs would outweigh the perceived benefits of moving production, a calculation that would soon be tested by the realities of global market dynamics and corporate bottom lines. These forceful threats, designed to compel companies to remain domestic, initially appeared powerful. The prospect of a 200% tariff was undoubtedly a significant deterrent. However, the actual outcomes diverged sharply from the anticipated results. The economic pressures and global market realities proved more influential than the administration's warnings. Instead of yielding to the pressure and bringing companies like John Deere back into the American fold, the policy inadvertently achieved the opposite. Rather than repatriating jobs and strengthening domestic manufacturing, the tariffs and the ensuing uncertainty accelerated the exodus of some operations. Furthermore, this protectionist strategy had unintended consequences for American consumers and the broader economy. The policy caused the prices of essential products to soar. Car prices, household appliances, and everyday goods all skyrocketed, placing a heavy burden on American families. The global supply chains, intricate networks vital for modern manufacturing, began to break down under the strain, leading to shortages and further price increases. United States factories struggled to find necessary spare parts, exacerbating production delays and escalating economic tensions even further. The attempt to shield the domestic economy had, paradoxically, exposed it to new vulnerabilities and hardships. Make sure to watch this video until the end, where we'll summarize the key takeaways and offer our final conclusions on this complex issue. Faced with mounting economic pressure and the disruptive effects of the tariff policies, some of the largest and most established American companies, including Ford and John Deere, found themselves at a critical juncture. They couldn't simply sit back and passively absorb the consequences of the shifting trade landscape. The rising costs, supply chain bottlenecks, and the looming threat of further tariffs created an environment where inaction was not a viable option. Instead of waiting for the situation to potentially worsen, these industrial giants made the strategic decision to migrate significant parts of their operations overseas. This move was framed as a necessary step to ensure their long-term survival and maintain competitiveness in an increasingly complex global marketplace. It was a proactive measure aimed at mitigating risks and securing access to more stable and cost-effective production environments, even if it meant distancing themselves further from their American roots. This migration represented a profound shift, signaling that the perceived benefits of staying domestic under the prevailing policies were outweighed by the imperative to adapt and survive internationally. John Deere, a name synonymous with American farming, significantly expanded its production footprint beyond U.S. borders, establishing or bolstering operations in Brazil and India. These two nations offered compelling advantages, most notably substantially lower production costs compared to the United States. This strategic diversification allowed John Deere to mitigate the financial burdens imposed by tariffs and maintain a competitive edge in the global agricultural machinery market. Simultaneously, Ford, another titan of American industry, demonstrated equal determination in its global strategy. The company invested a massive $1 billion to enhance its electric vehicle production capabilities in Mexico and Vietnam. Similar to John Deere's rationale, Ford's move was driven by the pursuit of more favorable economic conditions, particularly lower labor and production costs, which were significantly cheaper than those in the U.S. These decisions by two iconic American corporations underscored a broader trend: the complex interplay between national economic policies and the global imperatives of multinational businesses seeking efficiency and resilience in their operations. The allure of lower costs and access to burgeoning international markets proved powerful motivators, even amidst political pressure to keep production domestic. The ripple effects of these tariff policies and corporate relocations extended beyond just John Deere and Ford. The economic climate fostered by these changes prompted other major manufacturers to reassess their own operational strategies. Industry leaders like General Motors, GM, and Caterpillar, companies also deeply rooted in American manufacturing history, began shifting portions of their operations overseas. This trend was not merely about seeking lower labor costs, although that remained a significant factor. It was also a strategic maneuver to protect their profits from the volatility and increased expenses associated with the ongoing trade disputes and supply chain disruptions. These corporations concluded that they could not sustain the high costs of running exclusively domestic factories, especially as production expenses within the United States continued to rise. The inability to maintain cost competitiveness while operating solely within U.S. borders forced these giants to look abroad, further contributing to the pattern of offshoring manufacturing capabilities. This broader movement indicated a systemic challenge facing American industry in the face of protectionist policies and global market pressures. This significant shift in manufacturing strategy, exemplified by the actions of John Deere, Ford, GM, and Caterpillar, carries implications far beyond corporate balance sheets. It serves as a stark reflection of a major transformation occurring within the landscape of business strategy, driven by complex global economic forces and policy decisions. More profoundly, however, it sends a powerful and potentially unsettling message about the current reality and future prospects of manufacturing within the United States. The collective decisions of these industrial behemoths suggest that the prevailing business costs have become prohibitively high. Maintaining domestic production at a competitive level without incurring significant financial risk appears increasingly challenging for major players. This trend raises fundamental questions about the long-term viability of large-scale manufacturing in the U.S. and the effectiveness of policies intended to bolster it. The Made in America dream, once a cornerstone of economic promise, seems to be colliding with the harsh realities of global competition and the intricate dynamics of international trade. The consequences of these shifts are not confined to executive suites or investor portfolios. They reverberate directly through the lives of American workers. These changes don't just affect CEOs or investors. It's the American workers who bear the brunt of the consequences. The labor community, particularly in the Midwest, a region historically reliant on the factories of industrial giants like Ford and John Deere, is now confronting an economic downturn of a severity not witnessed in recent memory. This area, once a hub of manufacturing prosperity, is experiencing factory closures and mass layoffs. Workers who took pride in their jobs at these major companies, contributing to brands recognized worldwide, find their livelihoods evaporating. Their work, once a source of stability and identity, has been effectively replaced by overseas production, leaving them with diminished opportunities and profound uncertainty about the future. Countless families are left feeling clueless, struggling to understand how to maintain their livelihoods in the face of such drastic economic dislocation. The promise of secure, well-paying manufacturing jobs seems increasingly distant. The economic hardship extends beyond the direct employees of these large corporations, impacting the wider ecosystem of businesses that support them. Small businesses, ranging from local auto repair shops that service company vehicles to parts suppliers intricately linked to the manufacturing giants, are also facing closure. Their survival often depends on the economic health of the major manufacturers in their vicinity, and as these primary customers relocate or scale back domestic operations, the smaller businesses lose their vital customer base. These workers and small business owners had placed their faith in the Made in America dream, a vision often championed by political leaders like Trump, who promised to revive domestic manufacturing and protect American jobs. They believed in the narrative that policies like tariffs would strengthen their communities and secure their economic future. However, the reality they are experiencing is starkly different. That dream, for many, has turned into nothing more than an illusion, shattered by the complex interplay of global economics, corporate strategy, and policy outcomes that failed to deliver on their promises. The predicament facing American workers underscores the harsh realities of the current economic climate. They now confront not only the immediate risk of losing their jobs as factories close or relocate, but also a deeply uncertain future. New job opportunities, particularly those offering comparable wages and stability within the manufacturing sector, are becoming increasingly scarce in the affected regions. These individuals, once the pride of major companies and the backbone of their communities, are now left grappling with disappointment and a looming fear for what lies ahead. The economic security they once relied upon has been eroded, replaced by anxiety about their financial stability and future prospects. The situation highlights a painful disconnect between policy intentions and their real-world consequences, leaving many hard-working Americans feeling left behind by forces beyond their control. The industrial landscape is shifting, and the path forward for those displaced remains unclear and fraught with challenges. Trump's tariff policies, initially presented as a strategy to revitalize U.S. manufacturing and protect American jobs, ultimately yielded outcomes starkly contrasting with their stated goals. They were expected to foster a renaissance of domestic production, bringing companies back to American shores and creating a more robust national industrial base. However, what actually happened was completely different. Instead of achieving this repatriation of industry, the policies inadvertently contributed to an opposite trend. Rather than bringing companies back to the United States, major corporations like Ford and John Deere were among the pioneers in shifting production overseas. This wasn't an isolated incident, but part of a broader pattern where established American manufacturers found the economic landscape within the U.S., shaped partly by these very tariffs, increasingly challenging for large-scale competitive production. The America First policy, in this context, seemed to have unintended consequences that pushed some key players further away. Why did these iconic American companies choose to move operations abroad despite the America First push? The answer lies in the fundamental dynamics of today's globalized world. In this interconnected economic system, the cost of production within the United States has, for many large-scale manufacturing operations, become too expensive for companies to sustainably compete on a global scale. Factors such as labor costs, regulatory environments, and crucially, the added expense and complexity introduced by tariffs on imported components contributed to this reality. While Trump's tariffs might have aimed to protect domestic industries and potentially offered short-term benefits for some specific sectors or workers, they simultaneously created significant burdens for others. For multinational corporations like John Deere and Ford, operating within complex global supply chains, the decision to relocate production became a matter of survival rather than simply patriotism. These companies chose survival over patriotism, prioritizing their long-term viability and global competitiveness by seeking more cost-effective production locations, even if it meant moving away from their home country. The consequences of these decisions are deeply felt by those who had placed their trust in the administration's promises. Those who placed their faith in Trump's promise of a strong manufacturing comeback, believing that policies like tariffs would secure their jobs and revitalize their communities, are now enduring huge consequences. The reality they face is one of soaring prices for everyday goods, driven partly by the tariffs and disrupted supply chains. Job opportunities in traditional manufacturing sectors are dwindling as companies relocate or automate. What remains is a profound sense of deep disappointment, stemming from a dream of renewed American industrial might that has been shattered by complex economic realities and policy outcomes. The Made in America promise, for many, now feels like a painful reminder of unmet expectations and an uncertain economic future. The imposition of tariffs is not just an American story. It often triggers retaliatory measures, escalating into wider trade disputes. Can China push the U.S. economy into crisis through tariffs, treasury reductions, and impacting consumer struggles? China's own 125% tariff and associated supply chain disruptions are already causing severe consequences. The immediate effect is felt by consumers through higher prices. Car prices, for example, rise by $5,000 to $7,000 due to these added costs. Inflation surges across various sectors, and major companies, facing squeezed margins and logistical hurdles, are forced to halt or reduce operations. Tesla, a significant player in the electric vehicle market, serves as a prime example. China imposes tariffs. Tesla and the U.S. auto industry face challenges. Beijing's tariffs on U.S. imports, including cars, machinery, and crucial semiconductor parts, directly impacted Tesla's operations and pricing structure. China has imposed a 125% tariff on U.S. products, including cars, machinery, and semiconductor parts. This retaliatory measure demonstrates the interconnectedness of the global economy and how actions taken by one major player can swiftly provoke reactions that affect industries worldwide. The impact on major corporations like Tesla was swift and significant. As a result of China's retaliatory tariffs, companies like Tesla have been forced to suspend shipments of certain models to the Chinese market. Within just 2 days of heightened trade tensions, Tesla's market value dropped by over $2 billion. This staggering figure is a number that cannot be ignored, illustrating the immense financial stakes involved in these global trade disputes. The increased costs are inevitably passed down to consumers. Tesla's electric car prices have increased by $5,000 to $7,000. This price hike makes electric car ownership now a distant option, especially for those with limited budgets. This high cost not only reduces accessibility to electric cars, limiting consumer choice and potentially slowing the transition to greener transportation, but also creates significant financial pressure for those who need to take out loans to buy vehicles. Owning an electric car, once seen as an accessible part of a sustainable future, is becoming harder than ever, a direct casualty of the escalating tariff war and its impact on vehicle pricing. The economic ramifications extend further, creating a complex web of challenges. China is also reducing its US Treasury holdings. Will the US dollar weaken as a result? This is a major strategic move. China is making another major move by reducing its US Treasury holdings to a 15-year low of just $668 billion. Simultaneously, China is shifting towards using the Chinese yuan and euro in international transactions instead of the US dollar. This maneuver aims to lessen reliance on the American currency. This will not only affect the US dollar's global standing, but could also trigger major fluctuations in the global financial markets. The weakening of the US dollar could drive up the price of imported goods, leading to further inflation in the future and making consumer costs more expensive. Additionally, as the US dollar loses value, USD-denominated loans become more expensive to repay, adding further pressure on businesses and consumers already grappling with rising costs. This situation could lead to a challenging economic cycle globally, demonstrating how shifts in currency holdings and trade practices can have far-reaching impacts. The supply chain is facing severe disruptions. High car prices and delayed deliveries are becoming commonplace. But the problem doesn't stop there. We're also facing severe supply chain disruptions because car manufacturers cannot supply enough parts, leading to delayed deliveries, meaning thousands of cars cannot be delivered on time. This creates significant difficulties for consumers awaiting their vehicles. Can you imagine that the price of a new car has now exceeded $50,000, while used car prices have surged to $32,000? Owning a car is becoming a distant dream for those on limited budgets. Maintenance costs have also doubled, rising from $50 to $100, largely due to a shortage of spare parts. Furthermore, the weakening of the US dollar is making imported goods, including auto parts, more expensive. This drives up the cost of cars and replacement parts. This not only pushes car prices higher, but also increases the price of other consumer goods, causing living costs to rise significantly. The challenges are multifaceted. Electric vehicle production is projected to drop by 6.2 million units due to these disruptions, signaling long-term consequences for consumers and the transition to cleaner energy. If this situation continues, the production of electric vehicles could fall by as much as 6.2 million units, meaning the transition to clean energy will be delayed. Production costs will rise, and car manufacturing will become more difficult than ever. You can see that car companies are struggling to maintain production, driving transportation costs higher. Electric vehicles, once expected to change the future of transportation, are now becoming a burden with higher prices, making them out of reach for many budget-conscious consumers. Living costs will also increase, and life will become more expensive. The U.S. economy itself is showing signs of decline, with the stock market losing over $500 billion in value due to these pressures. Stocks pummeled as NASDAQ sinks 4%. Dow drops 1,000 points as new China tariffs loom over markets. The Dow Jones has dropped 1,000 points, losing over $500 billion in just one day. This isn't the end. The stock market is taking a heavy hit, as China's measures strongly impact U.S. industries and exports. From stocks to household budgets, everything is being affected. Difficulties for consumers are mounting. Rising inflation is making living costs more expensive, and weak consumer sentiment might force you and your family to save more and spend less. Can you overcome this difficult period when the economy is no longer stable? These fluctuations are deeply affecting the daily lives of American consumers. Rising car prices, long delivery times, and higher maintenance costs are just a few clear examples of the difficulties we face in today's current situation. The situation surrounding John Deere and its decision to move production serves as a microcosm of the broader challenges facing American industries. John Deere versus Trump. The issue of shifting production and its impact on U.S. agriculture is complex. John Deere, the symbol of American agriculture, recently caused a stir when it decided to move some of its production to Mexico. This move could have a huge impact on Trump's America First policy, which he once promised to uphold. Immediately, he reacted fiercely, threatening a 200% tariff on John Deere products made in Mexico. Trump stated, "John Deere is going to, and anybody else that does this, because it's hurting our farmers, it's hurting our manufacturing. And if you do that, you're going to have a 200% tariff put on the product that you make in Mexico right across the border." They think they're going to make product. But this move wasn't as simple as Trump thought. It could have unexpected consequences for the entire U.S. agriculture industry. For Trump, John Deere's move to outsource production is a betrayal. A company so deeply tied to America, now searching for profits elsewhere. It's no surprise that he threatened to impose a 200% tariff on every product from Mexico. But John Deere wasn't shaken. They continued to defend their decision, stating it's a necessary move to remain competitive in the global market. While Trump tries to intimidate, John Deere has shown that American companies can expand globally without being locked in by domestic protectionist policies. With rising production costs in the U.S., moving production to Mexico was a matter of survival for John Deere. In the U.S., labor costs are twice as high as in Mexico, and if they want to remain competitive, expanding into emerging markets is absolutely necessary. Markets like Brazil, India, and China are increasingly demanding agricultural equipment, and if John Deere doesn't act, they'll be left behind. That's why Trump's high tariffs aren't just a threat to the manufacturing industry. They can also put U.S. companies at a severe disadvantage in the global race. What's interesting is that this showdown isn't just about politics and tariffs. It's also a reflection of a big shift in the agriculture industry. Automation technology is gradually replacing traditional labor. GPS-controlled tractors, harvesting done by AI-powered machines, and drones scanning fields are no longer a novelty. But while technology is changing the game, Trump's protectionist policies seem to be holding on to an outdated economy, only deepening the divide in the agriculture sector. John Deere has proven that they're not afraid to face the pressure from Trump. This company understands that to stay competitive, they must expand globally. But will this force Trump to change his policies? That question remains unanswered. However, one thing is certain. If John Deere wins this battle, many other American companies will follow suit, making it even harder to protect domestic production than ever before. Trump has said, but they're going to have to pay a tremendous tariff, which means two things. They're not going to build the plant. If it's not too late, they're not going to build the plant. This country is going to make a lot of money. Or they're going to build the plant, but they're going to build it in the United States somewhere. And ideally a place like Michigan or South Carolina, where we have a lot of auto business. But we're not going to let that happen. The showdown between John Deere and Trump isn't just about tariffs and protectionist policies. It's the story of the U.S. economy facing an unavoidable change. If Trump wins, companies will be controlled by protectionist policies. But if John Deere wins, a big shift in how the U.S. economy operates will begin. The cost of equipment has just gone through the roof. To buy anything like that, because it just would be cost prohibitive. In the end, it's the American consumers who will pay the price, as food and agricultural product prices rise due to these protectionist policies. This could force Americans, especially low-income families, to face higher living costs, particularly for essential items like food. As a result, this trade war won't just affect companies and trade policies. It will directly impact the daily lives of the American people. China's strategic moves are also reshaping the global financial landscape. China abandons the US dollar. China's quiet withdrawal is significant. China has started to reduce its holdings of US bonds. China's USD reserves have dropped sharply to their lowest point in 15 years. This is a clear signal that China no longer wants to rely on the US dollar. Not stopping at selling bonds, state-owned Chinese banks have also stopped issuing credit in US dollars. Instead, they've shifted to using renminbi and euros in international transactions. The consequence is that China is reducing its dependence on the US financial system and preparing for a world without the dollar. This is a quiet withdrawal, an exit from the global financial system that the US has maintained for centuries. The implications are broad, even affecting America's closest allies. US allies begin to drift away. Is the US losing its friends? It's not just China. Even America's allies are starting to break away. Canada, Saudi Arabia, and Germany are rebuilding their own trade strategies, no longer relying solely on the US. Canada has signed important deals with China in rare earths and energy. Saudi Arabia not only sells oil to China, but also doesn't use the US dollar in these transactions. Instead, they're using renminbi. These countries are pulling away from America's influence, and a more multipolar world is gradually forming, with the US potentially losing its friends and influence. This reality shows a shift in global strategy, where countries are now prioritizing financial independence and autonomy in trade. This also reflects a shift in power within the global economy, with China rising to lead. China is shifting the game, from competition to domination. Not only responding with tariffs, China is aggressively investing in the electric vehicle industry. China isn't just acquiring crucial materials like lithium, nickel, and cobalt from Canada, but also building electric vehicle factories in Mexico, reaching the US market without the constraints of tariffs. US car companies like Ford and GM are facing major challenges. Meanwhile, companies like BYD and NIO from China are dominating the US car market, as American manufacturers struggle to maintain market share and face supply chain issues. The future of the US automobile industry is looking uncertain, and China isn't just competing, they're taking over. This shows a clear shift in the global automobile market, with Chinese manufacturers relentlessly expanding and overpowering American brands. It's pushing the automobile industry into a competition more intense than ever before. The dollar is losing strength. Countries move toward a new payment system. With all these changes, can the US dollar still maintain its dominant power globally? Currently, the yuan from China has captured over 6% of global SWIFT transactions. China is not only experimenting with digital renminbi, but also building a parallel financial system, no longer relying on the US. Can the US control global finances like it used to? Countries are moving toward a new payment system, an independent system, and the US will no longer be the leader. The Yuan, the digital renminbi, is the sign of a major shift in the global economy. Ford faces a major economic crisis. How much trouble are China and the EU causing? Ford is standing on the edge of a tariff tsunami, with $10 billion in revenue about to be swept away. And if this ship sinks, how will we, the consumers, pay the price? China's policies could lead to massive losses for Ford, as they decide to stop importing American cars, including key models like the F-150 and Explorer. China accounted for 15% of U.S. automakers' revenue in 2024, and Ford was expected to bring in about $5 billion from orders in China. But now, with the new tariff policies, they could lose up to 20% of their global revenue. That's $5 billion a year. Not only that, auto parts imported from China will also face high tariffs, driving up production costs by $2,000 to $5,000 per vehicle. This is the burden Ford is currently facing. It's not just China. The EU is also ramping up retaliatory measures against the US, including restricting car imports from America, especially Ford vehicles. The EU accounts for about 25% of Ford's export revenue, with major markets like Germany, France, and Italy contributing significantly. If the EU moves forward with this policy, Ford could lose between $3 to $4 billion every year. This will create an opportunity for competitors like Volkswagen and BMW to take market share, making things harder for Ford and raising unemployment in the auto industry. The reduction in production also affects the supply chain and auto parts suppliers, pushing even more workers into unemployment. Supply chain crisis. Reduced production disrupts the supply chain, negatively impacting part suppliers and worsening unemployment in the auto industry, making the economic crisis even worse. Ford is facing a critical decision. Can they maintain their position in the U.S. auto industry, or will they be overtaken by international competitors? Trump insists these tariffs are meant to protect American workers, but Ford disagrees, calling for a collaborative solution to achieve sustainable growth. While Trump might see this as a strategy to protect workers, in reality, these tariffs are causing huge losses for the U.S. auto industry, and Ford won't be able to maintain its competitive edge without changing their business strategy. In just a few minutes, you can fully fuel up, drive over 430 kilometers, no charging, no emissions. Honda's CR-V EFC EV is quietly rewriting the rules of the auto industry. While the world is throwing money into lithium batteries and charging stations, Honda's hydro and old fuel with a modern twist could rewrite the future of the car industry. In an era where electrification is the universal motto for global car manufacturers, Honda has chosen a path less traveled, a return to hydrogen, but in a whole new form. The CR-V EFC EV is more than just a car. It's a technology statement, born out of a collaboration between two industrial giants, Honda and General Motors. This model combines a 17.7 kilowatt-hour rechargeable battery, offering 29 miles of electric driving, with a hydrogen fuel cell system, giving a total range of about 270 miles, approximately 435 kilometers. And most importantly, it takes just 3 to 5 minutes to fuel up. This SUV doesn't need charging. It isn't dependent on the electrical grid, a strategic advantage in a time when many U.S. states are facing grid overload. Here, convenience becomes a new form of power, not because you can connect everything, but because you don't have to connect at all. Hydrogen has long been seen as a key element in reducing energy dependence across nations. No need to import oil, no need for a global EV charging network, and when produced from renewable energy, it becomes green hydrogen, a fuel almost free from geopolitical cost. Currently, though, only about 1% of global hydrogen is produced green. The rest is gray hydrogen made from natural gas, still releasing greenhouse gases. This makes the hydrogen car story not just about technology, but about energy policy and national investment. California, Japan, China, and the EU have all set goals to expand hydrogen fueling networks to hundreds of points by 2030. If hydrogen cars become widespread, this could be a game changer not only for the environment, but for national energy freedom. Consumers don't need to know about lithium supply chains or national power grids. They care about convenience, speed, and cost. The CRVEFCEV delivers all that quietly but effectively. 5-minute refuels, a range of nearly 435 kilometers, no charging clock to worry about, no battery degradation, no need for replacement in a few years. And notably, Honda offers $15,000 in fuel for the first 3 years. No flashy technology, no apps to connect everything. Just drive, refuel, and continue your journey. In an age where technology sometimes makes things unnecessarily complicated, simplicity is often a luxury. Conclusions. The narrative surrounding Trump's tariffs, originally intended to bolster the American economy and protect domestic jobs, reveals a complex interplay of policy, corporate strategy, and global market forces with significant unintended consequences. The tariffs, rather than shielding the U.S. economy, acted as a catalyst for major American companies like John Deere and Ford to relocate production overseas, primarily to Mexico, Brazil, India, and Vietnam, seeking lower production costs and relief from tariff burdens. This offshoring trend, also followed by giants like GM and Caterpillar, resulted in substantial U.S. job losses, particularly impacting the Midwest's manufacturing communities and undermining the Made in America promise. American consumers bore the brunt through significantly increased prices for vehicles, household goods, and essential equipment, alongside disruptions in supply chains and difficulties obtaining spare parts. Trump's retaliatory threats of massive 200% tariffs failed to stem the tide, instead highlighting the limitations of protectionist policies in a deeply interconnected global economy where companies prioritize survival and competitiveness, sometimes choosing it over national allegiance. Simultaneously, international competitors and trade partners reacted strategically. China imposed retaliatory tariffs, hitting key U.S. exports like cars and semiconductors, causing market value losses for companies like Tesla and forcing them to suspend shipments. China further asserted its economic independence by reducing its holdings of US Treasury bonds to a 15-year low and promoting the use of the Yuan and Euro in international transactions, weakening the US dollar's global dominance and potentially leading to further inflation and increased borrowing costs for American businesses and consumers. Other U.S. allies, including Canada, Saudi Arabia, and Germany, also began diversifying their trade strategies, moving away from singular reliance on the U.S. market and exploring alternative partnerships, particularly with China, further signaling a shift towards a more multipolar global economic landscape. The rise of Chinese EV manufacturers like BYD and NIO further challenged the U.S. auto industry, demonstrating China's shift from competitor to potential dominator in key sectors. The agricultural sector faced its own crisis, with plummeting crop prices, corn down 37%, soybeans 24%, wheat 35%, due to global oversupply, climate change impacts, and trade barriers, leading to a significant number of bankruptcies among small family farms, reminiscent of the Great Depression era. Farmers reacted to John Deere's move with boycotts, feeling betrayed by a trusted American brand and switching to alternatives like Kubota, AGCO, or Case IH, which offered more flexible repair policies and fewer software restrictions. The rise of automation and AI in agriculture further complicated the labor situation, while Trump's policies were perceived as clinging to an outdated economic model. In this turbulent environment, innovations like Honda's hydrogen fuel cell CRVEFCEV emerged, offering a different path potentially less reliant on strained electrical grids and complex lithium supply chains. While currently niche, only 1% of hydrogen is green, the technology represents a potential game-changer for energy independence and convenience, contrasting sharply with the challenges facing battery electric vehicles. Ultimately, the saga illustrates that protectionist tariffs can create severe economic blowback, harming domestic workers and consumers, straining international alliances, and potentially accelerating the very trends they were meant to counteract, all while the global economic power balance continues its dynamic shift. The path forward for the U.S. economy requires careful consideration of domestic support, strategic investment in supply chains, and adjusted trade policies that foster sustainable growth within the complex realities of global interdependence. Hashtag Trump tariffs. US economy, manufacturing shift. The video analyzes the consequences of Trump's tariff policies, detailing how major companies like John Deere and Ford moved production overseas, Mexico, Brazil, India, Vietnam, due to increased costs. It explores the negative impacts on the U.S. economy, including rising consumer prices, job losses in the Midwest, supply chain disruptions, and the subsequent retaliatory actions from China and the EU. The analysis also touches upon the struggles of the U.S. auto and agricultural sectors, the rise of international competitors, and the shifting global economic landscape, including China's move away from the U.S. dollar and the potential of alternative technologies like hydrogen fuel cells. West politics, economy, trade war, Trump, manufacturing, John Deere, Ford, China, tariffs, economy, global trade, politics, news, Russia, news, crisis. Title. Options. 1. Trump's tariff. Disaster. 7 ways John Deere and Ford's exit crushed the U.S. economy. Deep dive analysis. 2. America last. How Trump's tariffs forced Ford and John Deere to Mexico. Economic fallout explained. 3. China and EU. Strike back. 5 shocking effects of Trump's trade war on your wallet. Economy news. 4. John Deere versus Trump. The 200% tariff threat that backfired. U.S. agriculture collapse? 5. Tariff tsunami hits Ford. 7 reasons the U.S. auto industry is in crisis. Economic impact report. 10. YouTube tags. Trump tariffs. U.S. economy. John Deere. Mexico. Ford overseas production. Manufacturing jobs. Lost. Trade war consequences. China tariffs. U.S. EU retaliation. Agricultural crisis. Economic policy analysis. Fun NFO fact. Clickbait phrases. 1. Trump's biggest mistake? See how tariffs destroyed American jobs. 2. Ford and John Deere abandon America. The shocking reason why. 3. Is your job next? The economic crisis. Trump ignited. 20 image prompts. 1. Dramatic shot of Donald Trump pointing sternly, overlaid with 25% tariff graphic and a background map of the U.S. 2. Split screen. Gleaming John Deere tractor in an Iowa field versus workers assembling tractors in a Mexican factory. 3. Collage of logos. John Deere, Ford, GM, Caterpillar, with arrows pointing towards maps of Mexico, Brazil, India, Vietnam. 4. Graph showing rapidly increasing prices for cars, appliances, and groceries, with worried-looking American consumers superimposed. 5. A visual timeline showing the announcement of Trump's tariffs followed by news headlines about John Deere Ford moving production and layoffs. 6. Donald Trump speaking aggressively at a podium with a 200% tariff threat text overlay against John Deere Ford logos. 7. Image of a fractured global supply chain map, with cargo ships stalled and broken links highlighted between the U.S. and other countries. 8. Close-up of empty factory shelves labeled spare parts, symbolizing shortages. 9. Animated globe showing money flowing out of the U.S. towards Mexico, Brazil, India, Vietnam, labeled capital flight. 10. A split image. Left side shows a vibrant U.S. factory floor in the past. Right side shows the same factory floor abandoned and decaying. 11. Montage of diverse American workers, factory workers, farmers, small business owners, looking concerned or distressed. 12. Visual representation of the Made in America dream, e.g., flag, eagle, shattering like glass. 13. Split screen. Xi Jinping looking confident next to Chinese flag versus Donald Trump looking frustrated next to U.S. flag with tariff percentages displayed. 14. Graphic showing the US dollar symbol weakening, with arrows pointing towards Yuan and Euro symbols strengthening. 15. Image of Tesla cars with a large $2 billion market value graphic overlay after tariff announcements. 16. A price tag comparison showing the increased cost of EVs like Tesla for US consumers. 17. Map showing US Treasury bond holdings by China decreasing significantly over time. 18. Farmer looking distraught in a field of wilting crops, corn, soybeans, with falling price charts in the background. 19. Protesters holding signs boycotting John Deere, boycott Deere, keep jobs here. 20. Futuristic image of a Honda CR-V FCEV refueling quickly at a hydrogen station, contrasting with a long line of EVs at a charging station.